And we are live. Good
Hello,
evening.
everybody.
Hello from the dark Ozarks. Hi, Josh.
It's good. Hey, Lisa, how are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Made it
Good.
through the week, so
Yeah, it's been an interesting week,
yes, it has.
to say the least. But for everybody who's been following us and for everybody who's been tuning in, thank you guys. It's great.
We do. We appreciate. We really do, and it it means more than you know it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And great work, by the way. Of course, for people who don't know, I'm editor-in-chief of State of the Ozarks. We have a great member community, of which Paranormal Science Lab and Lisa is one of those extremely valued members, to how we kind of got to work together on a regular basis.
Yes.
And we've been doing a little something called Days of Creativity, hashtag Days of Creativity, on State of the Ozarks Spotlight, which is a public group that everybody can see. And today was your day.
Yes, it was, and so it was fun. It was fun. I got to highlight different things I do,
Mm-hmm.
more than one hat, and then Dark Ozarks is another hat.
Yes. Yeah. And, and the Days of Creativity was something I had been wanting to do actually since October. And the current situation brought it to the forefront and allowed us to move into getting that done. But I love that because for people who don't understand how it works, our members then post up to 3 posts a day on State of the Ozarks Spotlight, and then the rest of us, myself as editor-in-chief, Dale as publisher, and then many other members get to share and comment and all that kind of thing. Pardon me. Just finished up eating, and in that, very rarely are we able to set a stage where we say, here, talk about what you do because you're awesome.
Right.
And it's been, day after day of really, a lot of creativity, a lot of passion. And I love it because then all of a sudden,
great artists.
Oh, yeah.
Artists that I admire because boy, I can't do what they do.
I understand, but something that I think we all intuitively know this, but something that oftentimes gets overlooked is that writing is one of the most crucial art forms. And of course, your first post of the day was about the books that you have authored, and I absolutely meant what I said. You are one of the most gifted and hardworking authors in the Ozarks today, and your books are fantastic.
Well, that means a lot. It really does, Josh. I appreciate.
I mean it, and it is one of those things. I'm really hopped up on smoked pork steak right at the moment. So there's a barbecue place in Branson that has been doing carry out through this entire thing, and it's really good. Anyway, but it's one thing to have a natural talent for something, but it is another thing to bring the discipline and the research and the hard work necessary to produce. And and you got both. So
well, thank you. You too, by the way.
I appreciate that. I really really do. And I think it speaks into the fact that we work together, and I think we work together really well on stage and off, because of just not only our shared interests, but we tend to approach things very similarly. And hadn't thought a lot about this, but of course, our general topic is myth versus reality in the Ozarks.
Right.
let's start by talking about the reality of how you and I started working together, which sounds a lot like myth, but it isn't.
Yeah, it's kind of sounds like almost you wouldn't believe it if you read it.
You'd be like, "Oh, you guys made that up."
Yeah.
But we didn't. We
No,
did
no,
not.
it's talk about a chance happening.
Oh my.
See what about 3.5 years ago, right before
Um,
Halloween, about 2016,
yep, Halloween 2016.
and
Yeah.
I know I was standing in Peace Church Cemetery in Joplin with a TV crew and doing a live remote for the local TV station about events that we were holding and some of the spooky history of the area. And here's this guy in the cemetery. And what were you doing there? That's probably the funnier question.
Oh my gosh, yeah. and in this case, the guy standing in the cemetery was mortal, flesh and blood. Actually, it was Dale and myself.
Dale was there too.
And yeah, and we had independently of you guys been directed. A big shout out to Curtis Copeland with Society of Crofters, and Curtis had come to me with the idea of doing a story on Billy Cook and on Peace Cemetery in Joplin. And that's what we were done. We had driven up from Branson that afternoon, no pre-planning whatsoever, and then found the cemetery just as you guys were getting started there.
Uh-huh. And yeah, so we got to talking, and before long we were doing events and projects, and now Dark Ozarks.
I know. And that was a couple of weeks before we even started the member program, the member community. And then I think it was, I interviewed you for the article, and also Larry Campbell. And then, pardon me, and then when we really got the membership community rolling, I remember I gave you a call the next spring, I think about the next March, and then Paranormal Science Lab became a member shortly thereafter. And then we started just, seeing where we could work together.
Yeah. And, I think that's that's the nature of creativity, is just, you see what works and you see where it goes, and fortunately have some fun with it. And
I know.
Here we are now, developing a TV show.
Yeah, which is pretty doggone incredible. And
it is.
And doing so through the current national crisis.
Yes.
And again, so many thanks to folks who've tuned in regularly and liked Dark Ozarks on Facebook and followed us on Instagram and been part of the book giveaways and all that. We appreciate you guys very, very much.
Well, and one thing we ought to do too, we need to do a little shout out to some of the other people behind the scenes of Dark Ozarks. We've got other people who work very hard and contribute. And Rhonda Zipro, who is our showrunner and is fantastic. James Craigmile, our narrator, who is awesome. And then our technical team, Alex and Benton, they have done wonders so far under bad circumstances.
Yes, yeah. Oh my gosh, I know. I know. And using our newfound and suddenly appreciated tech to bring us live and in screaming color
Yes.
to you, your desktop, and your phones on Monday, Wednesday, and now Friday.
Yep. So now that we shared a little bit of reality that seems a little mythical, I recall not long ago you telling someone, yes, that we met over a serial killer and we got a strange look.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, we started our working relationship over serial killers in a haunted cemetery.
Yes, can't make that one up. But
No, really cannot. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So let's flip to some of the other myth versus reality in the Ozarks. How about just the sort of the image of the Ozarks?
I think that is a good place to start. And of course, what I think is fun is we get a lot of our really good ideas from just spontaneously chatting, texting each other through the week.
Yes.
About a wide variety of topics, which is so much fun. And it's funny in terms of going back to that creativity and bouncing things off one another. There's a spontaneity within that process that you really can't fake.
No.
It's either there or it's not. And one of the things that we'll dig into is the perception of the Ozarks has been shaped by by tourism and by tourism councils. And of course, that makes sense today. But a lot of people don't realize that has been in place really since the 1920s. And
yeah.
You know that, and I think it is. I think it's very fair to compare some of those created perceptions about the Ozarks that are that are fostered by tourism. And tourism's certainly not been all bad. That's no. There's been I think I would personally postulate, and this is just such an odd dynamic. I would postulate that in some unique ways, tourism has preserved certain elements of Ozarks culture. And what I mean by that is, for much of the 20th century, people would come into the Ozarks looking for the hillbilly, looking for that hillbilly pastiche, and wanting to take home a piece of it. And the real hillbillies, and I do use that term respectfully, and I consider that also to be part of my family. The real hillbillies realized very quickly that was something that they could capitalize on. And so you had a situation, so for example, wood carvers, basket makers, those are the ones that come to mind. But a lot of music, traditional Ozarks music, it became very clear that you could capitalize and you could make a living by doing those things. So you are appealing to a tourism image, but you are also, in so doing, you are preserving your own past. And I think that it's not unique solely to the Ozarks, but it is very dominant in the Ozarks, where it was not dominant in other areas. And we saw that develop along with this sort of tourism council. But coming back to that tourism, the one that really comes to mind, the one we were chatting about, was a tourism program that was Joplin was included in that, and Springfield. And I'm trying to think, of course, in 1927, there wasn't a lot of tourism dollar, like organizational stuff in Branson. So I'm not sure how much Branson was in that, but it was a program that dubbed the Ozarks, quote, the land of a million smiles.
Right. And I think it really kind of was done to go along with the launching of Route 66 in 1926.
Yeah.
So I think it mainly went through the corridor.
That makes sense. And the timing on that is really good. That's very synonymous. And if you hunt around in in old thrift shops and antique stores in the area and that kind of thing, you'll occasionally find leftover memorabilia with that branding on it.
Yes.
And it's old. And I think it's easy to, so coming back to the myth, it's easy to make the mistake that because it's old, like vintage 1935, that it's somehow authentic. And without realizing that this was an organized tourism council branding move that may or may not reflect the Ozarks and its culture.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's that patina of that postcard or the map or whatever that you take as authenticity, and
Yeah.
which is a play on the fact that the slogans they were selling, were they authentic or not? Well, of course, yes, it was a friendly area, but it's certainly just, that was just one dimension.
It is, and I think the one thing that I do think is interesting in the dynamic, of course, this muddles the anthropological pools, as to so to speak, but it's the fact that some of that material then inspired a next generation to become interested in Ozarks culture, and then dig into it. In some cases, finding more authentic culture. So, the thing that is so unique about the sociological perspectives of this is that there's no easy answers, and there's no completely pure anything. Like, one thing will inspire or connect to something, and one thing may not be 100% accurate, but it will somehow have a connection to something that is, or vice versa.
I agree.
It's very, I think the thing that you have to take into account when you start is that it's messy.
Yes. And do we want to delve into particular mess that we were discussing this morning?
I think so. I do have. Do you want to talk about the Mountain Maid?
Sure.
Okay, because that was for and I think I'm not opposed, especially with Dark Ozarks. I'm not opposed to layering in stories about the Mountain Maid.
Yeah.
But to me, what this feels like, and I was very interested to find out that independently, we concurred.
Yes.
We had come about this completely independently, and we'd arrived at the same conclusion. And we'll get into who the Mountain Maid is in a moment. But it's what it feels like. This would be the best analogy that I could come up with. And because of the 100 years, it's 2020, 1920 to 2020. We've had a century of tourism capitalizing upon, in some cases, the beauty of the Ozarks, and in some cases, the weirdness of the Ozarks.
Right.
And so, and I would suspect, I don't know, I would suspect that New Orleans and Salem have had a similar, that you would need to deal with a similar complexities in both.
Oh, yes, definitely. Salem in particular, and they've been very good at layering that and making use of it to the advantage of tourism and for prosperity of the town. And I think this is one of those kind of stories. But I think we also need to let people know this story really goes back a lot further than the 1920s. I mean,
yeah,
the Mountain Maid, and ironically, she's the Mountain Maid of the Ozarks, but she's not from the Ozarks. She was born on a pier in New York City in 1851, And we don't know, there's not a whole lot known about her backstory other than she was a nurse. And for whatever reason, just appeared in Berry County, Missouri, in the mountains in the late 1800s, and lived by herself in a cabin, and would walk several miles to get mail or go to the general store, and pretty much was secluded. But she was also known as the Witch of the Ozarks, because she seemed to have gift, and there are countless stories that she had very, very uncanny clairvoyance. But that's all that we really know. And so, you want to go on with what the myth became?
Well, I think it's what I would consider to be the analogy is that a century of tourism has left like the equivalent of treasure boxes around the Ozarks, waiting for you to, kind of discover these particular places or concepts or personas. And when you do, especially if the information goes back 100 years, there is that innate sort of that knee-jerk response to say, oh my gosh, it is in and of itself authentic.
Yes.
And my gut feeling, and I'm more than happy to be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But my gut feeling about the Mountain Maid is that this was an individual who was almost marketed to a public of saying, here is our mystic witch of the Ozarks. Go see her. Ooh, it's super, super cool, when there really wasn't necessarily potentially a lot to it. But once you have, it's, digging into that first layer of information, that it's very easy now to come to the conclusion, oh, this is super authentic. And tell me your thoughts on this person or persona that was created.
Very much the same. My feeling has always been that she may have had some gift. She may have had some gift. I don't know. But she was turned into almost an oracle. Like the Oracle of Delphi. Like a pilgrimage. And so it became this mystical thing to go see her. But when you read the accounts, they have more of ordinary feel to them in detail, that a lot of it seems to be very homespun, very commonsensical advice or observations, and she might have had insight beyond that, I don't know, but she didn't seem to participate so much in the sort of the phenomena. She didn't seem to be benefiting from it or profiting from it. And a lot of tales and the marketing seem to come a little later. In fact, during World War I, she left the Ozarks and went back to New York City and volunteered as a nurse in her 70s during World War I, and stayed there for several years. And came back, but no one really knows that backstory. I don't know. My personal feeling is probably we have someone that left us. That something happened back east, and she moved away, and it was kind of marketed after the fact that she said, well, who would marry me? No man would marry me if I knew all his secrets anyway. and it was kind of marketed that way, but I've never seen anything really clear that that was her own words.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, in this particular case, I don't feel like she was the one doing the marketing, but
Right.
I question some of the authenticity of how she came to be known. And something, there's a certain, to me, especially with the Ozarks in particular, there is a certain paradox that if it's too easy to find, oftentimes it's not true.
That's true. I mean, I found that with various stories and events as well. And I don't know, it just has always seemed to me that she was almost put out front to, we want to highlight our mountain witchcraft hoodoo past. Oh, and here's a face. Here's someone that, this fits the bill, because we've got, someone up on the top of a mountain and a mysterious bat story, etc. That we can almost create a fairy tale around. It's glitching again. Facebook is not cooperating tonight. Did we lose you? Are we back?
I'm back.
You're back.
I don't know what happened.
It's not being helpful.
Yeah. Oh, I am back. Hey, everybody. Technical
Hello.
difficulties. I'm just gonna rack it up to the fact that it's Friday night on Facebook and everybody else is on Facebook as well, but I don't really know.
That's my guess. That's my guess. Either that or we're not supposed to talk about these things, one of the two.
And yet here we are. I'd like to share that Vance Randolph quote that I shared with you this morning. And of course, for people who are familiar or unfamiliar, Vance Randolph, Ozark Magic and Folklore, originally published by Columbia Press in 1947. And Vance is the counterpoint to Land of a Million Smiles.
Mm-hmm.
And we have documentable evidence in one case. Well, of course, the chambers of commerce and the booster clubs and the people wanting to make a lot of money off of the Ozarks really did not like Vance. They didn't like what he published. They did not like what he wrote, mainly because it was true. And I think most especially what they did not like about it was that they had no control over it.
And they viewed him as an outsider.
Yes. Yes. But the thing that is so interesting, of course, when he, ultimately moved in around Pineville and essentially went native to the people without without a investment capital in the game, a lot of people did open up to him and came to consider him, a part of the indigenous Ozarks culture, which also got him, Vance couldn't win for losing. The fact that he went, for lack of a better word, he went native in Pineville and became so involved just in everyday culture, and then allowed people to start giving them their stories as they felt comfortable, got him a lot of derision from academia.
Yes.
At the time, particularly, if you're going to study of society from an anthropological perspective, you were supposed to study it, quote unquote, purely, observe with no interaction, as though you were, watching bugs in a terrarium.
Right.
and so when his books were being published, I still think that Vance Randolph has never gotten the recognition for his work that he deserves.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And he's, and I find it an interesting consistency that oftentimes, fame and celebrityhood, no offense to anybody who's famous and a celebrity, but oftentimes does not necessarily go to the people who deserve it. And I think that Vance, from an academic perspective and from a journalistic perspective, deserved much more than he got.
I agree. I think he's gotten a lot more respect after the fact, but it's a shame that he didn't receive it in his own time.
It is. And the other side of it is he definitely knew how to stir people up.
That's true too.
And I have his other book around here somewhere, but I can't put my hands on it right at the moment. He published a lot, comparatively speaking, and probably his best known title is Pissing in the Snow, which is a collection, for lack of a better terminology, it's a collection of dirty jokes. I mean, that's really what it is. They are hysterically funny. Not something that you necessarily leave out on the coffee table, depending on who's coming over. But it really, I think, we'll get into this quote in a second, but we've talked about liminal spaces so many times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that conceptual liminal spaces and physical liminal spaces go together. And things like individuals who, for example, practice witchcraft, by nature have to exist in a liminal space because of public perception, social perception. That much of folklore resides in a liminal space, and a lot of poetry exists within a liminal space, a threshold between worlds. And and many cultures outside of our own, I think that American culture and in sort of a church-driven culture and a 19 sort of a, I would say for lack of a better terminology, a 1950s science approach on culture says we have neat, tidy boxes and liminal spaces don't exist. And I think it's the reason that art, poetry, craft, lore, dirty stories, dirty jokes, if you want to call it that, body stories, these types of things all have such an innate appeal because it represents a reality that much of our world has been sanitized from.
Yes. That
and I think yes, and I think that's where I think Vance understood that intuitively, and I think most of his work was in that liminal space. So this was actually from Ozark Magic and Folklore, 1947, and it's the last paragraph. And I think this is a good bridge for where we're headed in our topic today. Last paragraph under the topic of Ozark witchcraft, page 300 in my book. Most of the Ozark superstitions are harmless enough, but this belief in witchcraft frequently leads to violent crime. When primitive people imagine that their troubles are caused by supernatural spells and that these spells are cast upon them by their neighbors, tragedy often results. Things happen in these hills which are never mentioned in the newspapers, never reported to the sheriff at the county seat. The casual tourist sees nothing to suggest the current of savage hatred that flows beneath the genial hospitality of our Ozarks villages. Still waters run deep, as Grandma Tolliver used to say, and the devil lays at the bottom.
And I think that that's very, very, very accurate. And I think that I think that that's what people don't want to look at, is that often we know that there is another layer underneath.
Yes.
And but we put a bow on it so it's easier to look at, or serves the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up here, and I know of things growing up, that things that happened that didn't end up in the papers. I mean, that still happened when I was growing up. So
yeah,
it's just something that is part of, I think it's a culture that is the literal crossroads. I mean, it's the crossroads physically, it's the crossroads liminally and spiritually. And if you look at the meaning of a crossroads, say from a hoodoo or voodoo perspective, that is a good summation of the Ozarks, and what's real and what's not. It's that meeting of two worlds.
Mm-hmm. And in something that Vance implies, and I think it is very true, in this particular case, when he's talking about the devil, what he's really talking about is man's inhumanity to man.
Yes.
And I know
just intolerance, refusal to understand.
Mm-hmm.
A stubbornness that is born out of a hard existence.
Yes. And there is a duality in and of itself in Ozarks culture. The tenacity required to survive also breeds a stubbornness that can really take on a dark turn.
Yes. Well, and of course, and we've talked about this before too, that so many of the people who settled this area were Scotch Irish. And so stubbornness and probably a defining characteristic of people.
Absolutely. And it necessary. I think this is the paradox in and of itself. Necessary for survival, but then can again wreak havoc in the wrong, in certain circumstances. And and it's it's very unpleasant. I'm going to jump over to some urban Ozarks culture, but at the turn of the 20th century, we saw terrible mob action and race riots directed against the African American population of Springfield. That was unbelievably dark, and was absolutely a crime against humanity. But it was a crime that was at the time written off as law-abiding citizens.
Oh yes. I mean, and it wasn't just one incident. Unfortunately, it was instances that throughout the Ozarks lasted about 13, 14 years, really, with as far as very intense events through southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. Some were written off as you said, and then others. It's one that happened in Joplin that tied up with a lynching that over someone that a black man that may have killed a police officer, and you had mob of about 4,000 people who actually overturned buildings and homes. But ironically, in that situation, you actually did have the city officials trying to intervene, and basically were swept away because of this massive of people. But it's all in that almost same time period of Smiles.
It is. It really is. Which I'm sure did not make it into the tourism brochures.
Exactly. I mean, and unfortunately, you know, we can go forward in time to the present, and that's we still have that duality. And it's highlighted in art as well. As you know, we are a tourist destination. There's wonderful things, but there is horrible drug addiction and crime in certain elements that is highlighted in, say, Winter's Bone.
I was just thinking of that, which is one of my favorite films, and
yes,
and it's beautiful. Down here where I live in Branson, Hollister, most of Winter's Bone was shot within 20 miles of my house, and I love the film. Of course, I love the performances. Big shout out to everyone who was in that film. Of course, that was the big star for Jennifer Lawrence, and one of the help me out, co-stars. Yes, was Shelley Walters Wagner, who is also a State of the Ozarks member, and just unbelievable performances. And one of them, we've talked about this before, but one of the striking co-stars, essentially a character in the film, is the landscape. And,
yes,
and that's literally like get in my truck and go a mile that way, and I start getting into that country. It's incredible. But you're dealing with really, really dark themes. Methamphetamine addiction. Meth is a huge issue throughout the Ozarks, and it's scary stuff, and it's a scary reality.
Well, it is, and it's one of those things that all these things exist in the same time and plane. Unfortunately, one of the street names for meth around the country is 417, and that's the area code here.
Our area code. I know. Yeah.
I have a friend whose daughter and son-in-law were in Hawaii a couple of years ago, and early 20s, and just got married, and they were at the beach and ran into some kids about the same age from I think back east, New Jersey, I think, and they were at when they heard they got to talking, and they asked them if they knew where they could get some 417, and my friend's daughter, being fairly naive, had no idea what they were talking about, and that was her introduction. That's another aspect of where she grew up. But but you have that now, but you had that throughout our history.
Yes,
markedly different nationalities.
Mm-hmm. And of course, not getting into the the arguments of prohibition, but meth has largely replaced moonshine.
Well, yes.
in that regard, in that aspect.
Yeah, well, to be honest, pot replaced moonshine, and meth has replaced pot in that regard.
Yeah. And of course, you as an attorney, I mean, you've seen the best and the worst of humanity.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've dealt with I have dealt with situations coming out of that would shock a lot of people, and unfortunately, I've seen things that I've told myself at one point this would have shocked me.
Yeah.
But by the same token, I don't want to look away from it, because if you look away from it, you're denying reality.
Yeah.
And I think we do a disservice. It's too easy to say, oh, that's someone else's problem, or this is that or that. If there isn't an acknowledgement of those situations, whatever they may be, whether it's now or moonshine in the 20s, or, whatever, the only difference is we look back and it's more romanticized, what happened in the past than what's happening now.
That is very, very true. There's
And,
that.
And unfortunately, in 50 years, we don't know how what's going on now is going to be viewed. Is it going to be romanticized, like, Bonnie and Clyde and so forth from the 20s and 30s?
Yeah, and it could be, and that is it is something. Of course, coming back to my neck of the woods, so to speak, conceptual neck of the woods, as editor-in-chief of State of the Ozarks, we cover both things that are in the past, and then we cover things that I feel like are culturally significant but are happening right now. Oftentimes that becomes coverage of contemporary art.
Yes.
And that's an area that rural Ozarks is not traditionally thought of for is contemporary art forms, but there are a lot of contemporary artists in the Ozarks, oftentimes getting overlooked. And and people will be like, oh, what's this doing in your Ozarks magazine? And I'm going, in 20 years, this right now is going to be history. So yes, it's culturally significant.
Exactly. And I think that's one thing, is that perhaps the reality and the myth both, they're not static, they are evolving.
And that right there, I think, is the conceptual leap that's very difficult oftentimes to make.
Yes.
That we like things in tidy little boxes, and when they're like, a bunch of unruly frogs and they keep jumping out of the boxes in various directions, we're like, oh, let's just not deal with this. Right,
but life's not nearly as interesting if they aren't jumping out of the boxes either.
It's really not. And more specific, if your frog stays in the box, it's probably dead.
Schrodinger's frog.
And it's something that I felt very strongly about from the very beginning of starting State of the Ozarks. It's been a dozen years now. And I love, for the record, full disclaimer, I love museums. I absolutely love museums. But to me, there is something disquieting about the fact that everything is under glass. And it's, for lack of a better word, it's a dead frog. It's been preserved, it's put away, and there it is. What gets me excited about writing stories are things that are still alive, traditions that are still going on, things that are still being engaged. And even cooler at times is when it is an art form that we're not anticipating, seeing a resurgence of. And one of the things that I am anticipating seeing, working with a member, is developing increased understanding about tattoo art and finding, the cultural significance, not only of tattoo art in the past, but the cultural significance of current tattoo art and what that can mean to the Ozarks. I love it when things are really alive and engaged, and that with the festival in September, that's something I put everything in to say, look, Ozarks culture is not a museum.
Right. Well, and it's one of those things that it makes people uncomfortable at the same time.
Yes, yes. And I think all good art on some level should make you uncomfortable.
True. Very, very true. Very true. Well,
It
we have gone from Mountain Maid to Winterbone and beyond.
absolutely, but we are keeping that myth and reality of the Ozarks is a constant through each of these.
Very, very true. Very, very true. But what do you think about how people change how they perceive each of them as time passes?
That's a good question. I think I think how we react to something says more about ourselves than it does about the thing to which we are reacting.
I agree, and I think that I think we're kind of going through a time period in this country right now where a lot of history isn't very tidy.
Yeah.
And we're going through a lot of history guilt, I think.
I would agree. I would agree.
I tend to say. And a lot of that, one aspect of that comes out of the Civil War time period and Reconstruction, and that affects things here.
Yes.
Too. I mean, fortunately, we haven't had a lot of, desecration of things or calls to dismantle things. And I find that interesting because in so many places, there's been a lot of controversy about statues and things and that. But one thing is, in this area, people seem to accept the past on its terms. That you have to look at it in its own time period. That seems to be happening here more than other places. What do you think?
I would agree. First of all, some of that culturally, and sometimes this can be a really good thing, and sometimes it can be a bad thing in the Ozarks. Things happen here more slowly. It just takes longer for things to happen. And in some cases, in terms of progress, that can be frustrating. It can be especially be frustrating to the younger generation. But it is also there is also an insulative quality, sort of like, kind of like a bumper on a car, that you don't get terribly jolted in the Ozarks because things do move a little more slowly. And I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing, because it gives us as a society a little more time to think about it and to be in dialogue about it, hopefully to be in civil discourse about it, and really understand some of the mechanisms as they're impacting us. And so that's I think factors in that. I love the term that you just coined, which is accepting the past on its own terms.
Well, yeah, I think so. I think you have to judge the past by its time period too. We tend to sometimes rush ahead and say, well, that makes no sense. Well, but you're not sitting in 1850 in the middle of the mountains, and I think you have to look at anything anywhere that way.
You do. Well, in order, I think, to me, for engaging in civil discourse and for approaching any of this historic and sometimes uncomfortable subject matter, there are certain things that we have to bring to the table. One of them is a sense of context. One of them is a sense of maturity. And there is that push. I think it goes along with a history guilt. But to me, it is an incredibly immature desire for an idealized purity in, for example, our heroes. And that's dangerous. That is we're trying to think of history as though we're an idealistic 10-year-old. And I mean, idealists, don't get me wrong, I know a lot of idealistic 10-year-olds, and bully for them, but we have to grow past that, and we have to be willing. To me, it is a hallmark of free thinking liberalism to look at these issues in all of their context and understand where these people are coming from, and be willing to accept the fact that our heroes are not, this is not a Roy Rogers, Dale Evans story. Our history is messy. Human beings have issues, and our heroes, while they may have done great things, are flawed, problematic human beings with interesting, messy lives, and that our quote unquote villains are as well. And our heroes may have done terrible things, and our villains may actually have done good things. And that's what makes history interesting.
Exactly. And I think that gets us to the heart of our focus with the show.
Yes.
That, portraying and examining some of these events very realistically and not one-dimensionally.
No, no. I mean, and you and I have both had the what I would consider to be the privilege of growing up in being challenged on our beliefs, on our ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And there are really uncomfortable times when the thing that, for example, in my case, things that I, for example, would really like to believe, and I have to accept the fact that, that's not necessarily true. Life, and this is such a pure concept for the Ozarks. Life is hard.
Yes.
And life is hard. We don't always get our way. And there is a seasoned maturity that comes out of that. And I think at the end of the day, a level of empathy for our forebears. It's very, to me, it's very egotistical that we can judge history. Who are we to judge history, in all honesty?
Well, true. I think all we can do is hopefully understand why people did what they did and why something may have happened. Yes. But and hopefully, if people can identify with some of these complex characters that we're going to talk about, then hopefully we've done a little bit of our job.
Yes. And with that, it is cliche, but I would say it is also true that, those who forget our history are doomed to repeat it. Mm-hmm. Remembering and digging into complex, uncomfortable, difficult, problematic aspects of our history is how we learn from it. And we learn, and it creates, to me, it creates sort of that inner library file when something comes up that if we had not researched, if we did not know this stuff, it would be coming at us straight out of the blue. It'd right. be like, we have no clue how to deal with this. And then if we've done our job correctly and we learn from this uncomfortable and difficult history, when these things come up, there'll be a little check moment in our mind where we're like, wait a second, I know something similar to this. And we can go to that moment in history, find the information, and have maybe not all the answers, but at least some context of how to respond. and how to learn. And hopefully, you know, it reminds me, of course, we're both Star Trek fans.
Yes.
You know, the a a regular theme in Star Trek of being caught in a time loop, going over and over and over, and each time they learn something a little bit more, that the next time they apply it and learn a little bit more before they're destroyed. Repeat the loop, and finally they've learned enough that they can get out of the problem.
Exactly.
To me, that's what history is about.
I think that really is a good analogy. And it's not always easy. And
No.
you know, sometimes we have to face our own demons in the process.
Yes. And I think the most uncomfortable one is coming face to face with our own biases.
Yes. And
we hate looking at that.
well, I think everyone does, and we're kind of at a time that people really don't want to do that.
No, it is, well, and you know, I don't think we ever really want to, at least without some level of awareness. And you know, we all want to be enlightened, but we don't want to become aware.
Yeah.
Going, I'm sorry. And it is, and I always, I would, I'm always tempted to use the term primitive culture, or primitive cultures, but I always put primitive in quotes because I don't think they really were in many cases. And ultimately, I guess what I have to land on is older cultures or ancient cultures almost consistently seem to understand yin and yang, black and white, a balance, a balance between day and night, those types of things. And I think that modern culture, and I think that modern American culture really focuses on you know, this sanitized sense of almost a cultural purity. I hesitate to use that word, but certainly a cultural sanitization that you know, you just, everything needs to be scrubbed clean and made comfortable and safe, and then we can be happy. And you know, even, you know, and I mentioned this before, I'm a long time yoga practitioner. Where you really get the most benefit in yoga is when you are the most uncomfortable.
Well, that's really true for anything, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you know, if you're not a little uncomfortable, you aren't learning, or you're not trying. So,
Which you know, brings up an interesting an interesting challenge for us as you know, we move closer and closer to the, you know, conceptual, you know, bringing Dark Ozarks to life, and you and I are co-producers and co-writers. How uncomfortable can we make people?
oh, well, no. I think probably the question is, when do they put the brakes on us?
No doubt. Okay, guys, pull back from the edge. Pull back from the edge. Oh, I don't know. You guys who are listening, how uncomfortable do you want us to make you with Ozarks culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. Is, you know, how far do you want this to go? You know, hearing from you helps us too, because yeah, unfortunately, I think Josh and I can go further than probably the network will let us. But
it's a good chance of it. There's a very good chance of it. unless we have a merry band of cheering misfits by the thousands who are following us on social media and saying, yes, we want more.
That's right. So,
and then we can be like, I'm sorry, guys, we're just satiating the fans. It's not our fault that they're sick and twisted. We had nothing to do with it.
Maybe a little bit, but
Just a smidge.
Wow. Okay, we kind of did go down the rabbit hole tonight.
Absolutely. Well, we've got an amazing full moon tonight.
Oh, that's true. I had forgotten about that. So that's true. So I will blame it on the full moon, because it certainly does. It certainly does create havoc in my world as an attorney. So
it's, let's just say it's the day that I don't go shopping in a big box store that has everything I could possibly need.
Same here. Now, if there's anything that you want us to talk about, if there's particular stories in our past that you want to hear about, or if there's particular themes, please don't be shy. I hope you've gotten the sense here that Josh and I are having a lot of fun with this, and we want you to have fun as well. So, and maybe at least then, if it gets too far out there, we can say it's not just us. So,
absolutely. I want to cover aliens. So, guys, aliens, more alien questions.
Okay, alien questions in the Ozarks. Okay, start digging, people.
Yes.
Although I guess that, yeah, if you want to go there, I guess Monday we kind of go there. That there is the Missouri Roswell.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it. My question is, after the cattle mutilation, do they have a barbecue? I mean, I would.
Barbecue sauce or shrimp cocktails. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Good times. Very good
times. So, unless you want Josh to go down that route Monday, put in your questions. So
yes.
And I'm afraid he might anyway. So
put in all the non-alien questions and save Lisa from me going to the Missouri Roswell and the cattle mutilation stories.
Yeah, well, we might go with Roswell, but the cattle mutilation stories, and we'll try to rein him in. But
I might show up on Facebook like with a tinfoil hat and eating a steak.
Maybe a Moby the cow mask or something.
Not impossible.
Well, we have had our fun, our full moon fun, and we really do enjoy, and we appreciate everybody. And
absolutely,
we will be back Monday, and I guess we'll be talking aliens and whatever else you want, or please. Questions, or I'm at the mercy of what he comes up with. So help me.
Yes, that's very fair.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Josh. Bye-bye.
Night.